Who is El Chayo? Nazario Moreno, alias El Chayo, is a drug lord who died 3 times and proclaimed himself as a saint before the fourth and definitive death. Nazario Moreno, El Chayo, spoke to animals, meditated, preached, and murdered for divine justice. They say that Nazario Moreno, founder of the Michoacan family, died twice. But in the Tierra Caliente area of Michoacan, there is a legend that there were 3 before the definitive one. As a child, at the age of 7, while playing in a river, he slipped, fell into the water, and hit his head with a stone. From the water, they took him unconscious, purple, and already half inflated, according to the story. The blows that tried to revive him began to fall on his chest, while his mother prayed for a miracle to be returned to his child. The boy finally woke up, confused and vomiting water. Since then, the mother thought that her son had been born favorite of God, according to the stories that run from mouth to mouth. A few years later, when El Chayo was already a teenager, he had his head broken in a soccer game. Some say that the accident happened while playing, while others say it happened in one of the many fights that El Chayo had because he was troubled since a child. Because of the cranial fracture, they had to place a plaque on his head. After that, nothing was the same. The legend says that since then he began to hear voices that he thought were divine. So far, Nazario Moreno had already died twice and resurrected. He lived to die 2 more times, the last one during the operation to arrest him. According to the authorities, he was traveling alone on a mule when he was attacked by Marines and soldiers who repelled the attack and killed him. This time, they had to show his body because before 2010, the authorities had already presumed that El Chayo was dead, killed in an attack when in fact he was hiding. For this unique drug lord, 40 years of life and death were enough to become a saint even before he died. El Chayo had a chapel built in the town of Holland, Apatzingán. El Chayo's cannibal and preacher side. A strange guy without a doubt. El Chayo is one of the strangest and most violent drug traffickers in the Mexican national catalog. Not only did he used to meditate, but he also used to assassinate, torture, and even cut heads off for divine justice. That's the reasoning he will leave in the messages left with his victims. He also made any new cartel recruit go through an initiation which consisted of committing acts of cannibalism. According to testimonies offered at the time by the federal authorities, the initiation was a hard process, which consisted of dismembering and sometimes preparing the heart. The initiations were called dinner, and they were held at night. Some were safe for the organization. Mystical, esoteric, preacher, and a drug trafficker were all part of Nazario's character. At one point, he even wrote a book with his thoughts and his philosophy. The name of the book was Thoughts, and it was at this point when he started to distribute that book as a Bible among his hitmen and traffickers. Forced to follow the precepts of his leader who presented his work, Nazario Moreno also communicated with animals. Originally from Apatzingán, Michoacán, where he was born on March 8, 1970, Nazario Moreno was called El Loco from a very young age. Over the years, they also gave him more nicknames like El Dulce, El Pastor, El Doctor, El Macho Loco, and El Más Loco. All of them was the same person. That child, Nazario, could fight up to 10 times a day, which resulted with his mother, the abuser as he called her in his book, started to beat him up after fights so that he would stop fighting instead of telling him to defend himself. She was a tough woman, he wrote in the prologue of his book. We all suffer from her energy. all of us, both male and females. El Chayo never went to school. He was poor, and there were just too many of him. He had 12 brothers, so his mother could barely look out for them. So he learned on his own in Caliman's comics. This character who dressed in white, wore a tunic on his head, and had mental powers. Caliman's comics placed an idea on Nazario's head that nothing was more powerful than patience and the human mind. So in conclusion, he cultivated both things, mental power with animals and meditation on the Hungarian hill near Apansingan. John Elridge was his main evangelical influence. His book, Wild from the Heart, was mandatory for his drug traffickers' initiation as Knight Templars, writes journalist Umberto Patghetti. Nazario tried to give mental orders to animals like dogs and pigs, but Nazario himself wrote in his book that the only one who listened was his donkey. Nazario claims that he approached his donkey about 3 or 4 meters and mentally ordered him to approach him, and immediately the donkey obeyed him by the force of his mind or by interest. He narrates in his book that every Knight Templar had to read The Businessman's Side of Nazario. At the age of 16, after working peeling onions, throwing garbage, and melon plantings, Chayo immigrated to the United States. There he became a trafficker. He started like many as a seller of marijuana and then became a seller of methamphetamines. He also started using drugs and became an alcoholic. He returned to Apansingan to grow his own herb to distribute in several states of the country. Then he sold cars from the United States that entered Mexico illegally and became a businessman. The same with lemon, hats, drugs, or taxis. By then, Nazario had already committed his first murder during a drunkenness, became a man of arms, and at the same time entered an Alcoholics Anonymous and cleaned himself of crystal and alcohol. From there, he begins to preach his word. Rich and violent. They had an idea of Nazario being almost immortal, where he started to gain followers throughout his states and started to call them La Familia Michoacana, a cartel that started off as a self-defense group for Michoacán, which was dedicated on attacking and removing Los Zetas from the state with its same methods of intimidation and violence. Like Los Zetas, La Familia Michoacana frequently started putting messages on billboards to communicate with the public. They are also excessively violent. The most infamous incident being that of the 5 human heads thrown on the dance floor in 2006. How were the Knight Templars created? Combined with violence, El Chayo and his own, including his right-hand man, Servando Gomez Latuta, became a kind of benefactors of the community. They provided employment and protection to merchants, did social work, and recruited hitmen that Nazario handled as apostles. The group became powerful and began distributing methamphetamines to countries such as China and the Netherlands. From 2010, when El Chayo pretended to be dead, it seemed that the power of La Familia Michoacana was fading. In reality, it happened that they were transformed, becoming an even more radical, violent, and messianic group. In March 2011, the Knight Templars appeared in Michoacán and announced it with banners throughout the state. They will now regain power from La Familia Michoacana, explains Inside Crime. Behind that group, there were helmets of Roman warriors during the initiation ceremonies and distributed propaganda promoting themselves as champions of the fight against materialism, injustice, and tyranny was still El Chayo hidden somewhere. Within the organization, Latuta began to gain more power that reinforced the preaching essence of the criminal group and its firepower. However, During Pope Benedict XVI's visit to Mexico in March 2012, they announced a temporary ceasefire so that the Pope could go to Michoacan. By then, the power of the group already felt on La Tuta, which forged its leadership in the ideas of El Loco Nazario. Despite their power, they fell. One died in 2014, being Nazario, and another prisoner in 2015, being La Tuta. The Knight Templars are practically missing. However, we still hear from the Knight Templars from time to time.